It was the summer of 1944, deep in the pine woods of northern Louisiana. The war felt far away here. Only the faint rumble of army trucks and the buzz of cicadas hinted that the world was still on fire. Rows of low wooden barracks sat behind barbed wire, where hundreds of German prisoners of war waited out their days under the slow, relentless American sun. Most of the guys had been brought in from North Africa. They were once Rommel's proud soldiers, but now they were just cutting wood and moving logs.
They worked, ate, slept. Des ran together.
But every night after roll call, when the guards chilled out and it wasn't so hot, the Americans would give out little cool things. Baseball gloves, magazines, sometimes even a junky old radio playing jazz. Then one day, some comic books showed up in the rec hall. They looked funny as anything. The covers had these tough-looking heroes punching goofy German dudes in helmets, with some screaming women in the back. The titles were loud and flashy: Captain America, The Fighting Yank, Spy Smasher. The German prisoners crowded around, laughing. "Is this the stuff Americans read?" one asked.
"Kid stuff," another grumbled, flipping through one.
Hans Becker, a young corporal from Hamburg, held one up. The cover had a hero with a cape knocking out a Nazi officer with one punch. Hans laughed so hard he almost choked. "They think this is war? Look at him, fighting in tights. Not even a uniform." The guards watched, some smiling, some wondering what was up. To them, it was normal. Comics were all over back home. Kids would buy them from the corner store. Soldiers read them all over Europe and the Pacific. But these Germans were raised on propaganda and thought their country was the best, so the idea of making war look like a cartoon was weird, even insulting. Hans threw the comic back in the box. "Only a screwed-up people would waste paper like this," he said.
"Wie save ink back home."
But later that night, when the lights were low and the guards went to bed, Hans couldn't stop thinking about those pages. The bright colors, the strong faces, the weird mix of fighting and jokes. Something felt wrong about them. The heroes weren't soldiers. They were just regular people, reporters, inventors, and kids with masks. And they fought for doing what's right, not for taking over. The next day, he had to see more. During lunch, Hans went back to the rec hall and got another comic. This one was Captain America number 36, from 1944. He flipped through, chuckling at the over-the-top action.
Then he stopped.
On page 4, there was a German officer yelling in a bunker. He had a wide face and a scar under his left eye, just like Hans himself. The name said Colonel Becker.
His stomach tightened up.
He read what the guy was saying. The character was a coward, telling his guys to go die for him. The words made fun of how stuck up the country was. Hans read it twice, his hands shaking a bit. Colonel Becker tells his guys to fight till their last breath, while he hides behind their courage.
That hit home.
He wasn't a colonel, just a corporal, but he looked just like the guy. The name, the scar, even how nervous he looked. Someone in America had drawn him, or someone like him, as the bad guy. That night, Hans sat by himself outside the barracks, the comic in his lap. The camp was calm, the smell of beans in the air. He watched the sun go down over the fence and wondered how far these comics went, how the Americans saw them, not as soldiers, not even as people, but as what tyranny really means, cartoon bad guys to get beat up. A guard walked by, saw the book and smiled. "Pretty wild, huh? Cap really roughs up your guys." Hans nodded, trying to smile. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Good draws." But inside, something was happening: anger, confusion, and a bit of shame he didn't get. The next morning, the prisoners lined up for work. Hans had the comic in his jacket. When Otto, his friend, noticed, he smirked. "Still reading those American fairy tales?" Hans hesitated. "Maybe they're not all fairy tales."
Otto laukhet. Careful, Becker.
"You might start thinking the hero wins." Hans looked out at the American trucks and tractors, the guards talking with farmers, a country just going on with things. For the first time, he wondered who the real heroes were. At first, the comics were just something fun to look at, a splash of color in the bore of camp life. The Americans would leave a box of them every week in the rec hall, fresh issues from town brought by the kid brother of the corporal loved them. The Germans laughed at them, made fun of them, and even used the pages for lights. But after a while, the laughing stopped. Some guys started reading quietly, acting like it was just to kill time, but they looked at the pages longer than they tried to. Evenings at Camp Ruston were long. After dinner, with the bugs going and the guards playing cards, the prisoners would hang out by the lights. One of them, Karl Meissner, who used to be a teacher, began reading the comics out loud using his clear English, translating as he went. He did it for fun at first, doing funny voices and making everyone laugh. But the vibe changed after a few times. He read in Captain America how regular people, Shop owners, women, even kids, stood up to the people that push other people around. He read about heroes fighting not for a Führer, but for an idea. The words touched them in ways that didn't want to admit. Otto rolled his eyes. Typical American crap, he said. They make war look like a carnival. Everyone smiling while they shoot. But Hans didn't laugh this time. He watched the drawings of normal people saying no, of bad guys shouting orders that sounded way too familiar. It was the first time he saw their own blah blah in the reverse image, not as something to be proud of, but as something stupid. That night, Hans dreamed of that panel with Colonel Becker hiding behind his men. He could almost hear the words flying out of his head, the put-downs that dragged everything he'd ever believed in through the pulp. He woke up sweating, the faint sound of jazz from the guard's radio floating in the dark. The next morning, he found himself looking at the camp's bulletin board. The Americans had put a news clipping next to the work schedules. U.S. industry sets new record, 100,000 planes built this year. Someone had taped up a comic strip with an American pilot smiling under some word as saying, "We fight for the sky, not for the glory." Hans looked at it for a long time. He remembered the Luftwaffe pilots he once admired, grim, like a machine of a person who thought emotions were weak. Here, even in the draws, the Americans seemed to think the thing his world had said no to was the best thing, being real. By the middle of August, the comics were all over the camp. Guards would trade issues with prisoners, Superman for Wonder Woman, Captain Marvel for the Spirit. Then something crazy started to happen. The POWs started making their own. Using charcoal and ration paper, they drew funny things where the heroes said with the German accents, or the bad guys wore American uniforms. But the drawings softened, mockery turned to curiosity, and trash-talking turned to copying. One afternoon, an American sergeant walked by the art table and stopped hard. "You boys are making your own comics?" Carl shrugged. "Practicing English," he said. The sergeant smiled. "You're catching on fast.
Keep it up."
When he left, Hans whispered, "He thinks it's a game."
Carl nodded. "Maybe it is. But games tell the truth sometimes."
That night, they put their comic the wall, a short story about a German soldier who wakes up in an American camp and realizes the war is done, but nobody has told him. The last panel showed him smiling faintly, saying, "Maybe peace is what it's all about." Nobody laughed at that one. Weeks went by and letters arrived, thin censored, which said things were not going well.
Towns damaged.
Families homeless, factories closed. Hans read his mom's shaky words by light, "It glows red at night."
"We sleep in the cellar. Are you doing okay, my son?"
He folded the letter and looked at the American comic in his hand, so bright and clean, nothing like the mess back home. It wasn't just a way to relax. It was like a mirror, a loud, colorful look at everything they'd been told to hate, yet somehow they couldn't stop looking at it. When Carl read that night, his voice shook when he translated a line from Captain America. "The fight is not against people, but against those who steal what's rightfully theirs."
The words hung in the air. No one said a word.
Then Hans whispered, "Do you think they mean us?" Carl looked at him, unsure if he should answering him not. That night, some guys stayed up late, staring at the lights through the wire. Somewhere beyond those lines, Americans were reading the same comics, but they think the heroes were real. Hans wondered what it took to live in a place where hope showed up on a printed paper. It got colder as fall sneaked over Louisiana. The camp days got shorter, and the sounds of the prisoners were muted. The jokes that had been thrown at each of the comic panels had begun to fade away. That became just a simple hush that even the guards picked up on. The Germans could shout the names of every American superhero that came to mind. They'd get together, discuss the man shield that Captain America had, but what was just jokes and gags, there was something else there. For the men who grew up under the watchful eye of the media told them. The books seemed to make an impact that they all need. The heroes would not follow orders, turn on generals to save their very worst of enemies. It was a rebellion that was put onto the pages. One night Hans sat outside the bar racks flipping through an old book where a detective would solve crimes of the time and that were always seeking out for the truth. Nas could not even remember the time that he celebrated truth back home, since there was many cases where truth was a danger. Otto began to walk over with smoke coming out of his lips. "It seems to me that you read that book like the Bible," he said, "but I don't think they are." Hans did not look up and replied, "This might as well be it." Otto said, "Don't you think that these are saints and heroes in fancy costumes?" Hans spoke, "The men protect the weak and ours demand the shut them up." Otto had a frown on his face, ready to yell out a reply when a guard scanned them with a flashlight. For just one SEC you could just see them for who they are, a shadow that is between what they had lost, the world behind them that they even understand. At the recreational hall the Americans had set up a news movie playing for what's going on so that they could watch. The movie started, and right with it an animal cartoon came on the show where it was Donald Duck and the soldiers laughed. They began to change the show over to Sodders from Europe, who was passing out chocolate in town over in the village. The Sodders watch in shock as they started to show them faces that were calm and seemed nice. When the lights went on, no one made any comments. The guards would get it all together as one of the guards said with a soft voice, "The truth is not what you think it is." Later that night Nas was laying awake as insects made noise outside of the camps. And was thinking about he looked like a villain. Did the artist seem him as cruel, or was it the uniform? The morning came as he saw Carl drawing once more. This time it was no prank, it was to draw a German soldier that was in wired bars holding a book in his hands. Over him he drew a talk balloon with words saying the enemy might know us better than we know themselves. Hans stared before he said it was good work. Carl replied with a head nodding.
How about we show this to them?
Hans gave a small laugh, said when we've been not seen as the bad guys might be one day. That night doing the English lessons the sergeant from the camps brought in more stuff for reading and an article titled Why We Fight. That America says that this helps hold democracy in place and shield those who aren't heard. The words that he heard brought the sentice to place a feel that he could describe himself.
Hans asks Louis, "What is that you want to fight?"
The sergeant gave his shrug, did not know anything too fancy, but I know I fight for them that can't say anything back home.
I think that's good enough. Hans gave a nod.
Now he sees all the certainty. It's been in couple weeks, everything has began to have tape marks on it. They were now talking to each with what they had learnt. Hans started to pull out the story about the villain. He stared at the face where captions America was standing over, giving the enemy something that he thought he never forgive. In springtime, as everything was getting warm, the prisons was starting to think and see of some kind of end. Everyone was whispering to one another that Germany went to ashes with their head of power was dead. But as the news for sure a strange sign of quietness hit. But the guard was glad that they were alive, shook that and said good luck for what is next. For Hans the end felt like a change. He walked the street that day. Many pages that were tiered was on the floor. And some sentences from it were to make people look at the sky. He took the scrap into his pocket. The weeks were a mess of papers, transports and saying goodbyes. The guards who were pointing guns would instead tap the people and say travel safely. He had trouble as he only could say thanks. Louis said don't let anyone say that you were wrong, Becker said. A week's travel show to trains and see that home was not home. Hamburg as it fell to the floor as his home was the one that got destroyed. Getting work was hard to do, he helped fix American machines. The shipping stamped where to send him place so he can fix it all. He takes out one of the old comics and reads what they need and what they need to win. So he can draw the families again. By 1950 he had collections for his stories to tell. Where they can find the hero. Later on Hans will be painting people who have had their hearts broken and that the test for people were not drawn with guns but from inside. He passed his thumb to see and feel the word to see a sense of something in him.
Living inside of Some wäre Else.
Came down to saying do you think that they will ever see us as evil? Otto reply, he may but we don't have it end that way. There was only sound for a while but a noise out of the camp and in that noise dreams are awaken. The snow was beginning to melt as edges went over with the sun. Smoke came from the dinner with bread scents going through. The guards trust the Germans now to walk without any chains. The war seemed to have stopped itself overseas to not feel the need anymore, but her in Louisiana, it's different. Nas noticed the changes that conversations held. All the words has lost their shine. They chatted about the stories they were reading. The ment was invited to fix the roof of the school in town. It was a supervisioned work by a smaller group. Over at lunch a group of children looked on with great worry about the soldiers of enemies. A child held up Superman to Han and asked do he like it. Nas froze with no words. The child smiled as he showed a story where Superman saved a ship and with that was all that made Hans smile. Hans finally said yes, I think he's a good guy. The child had a smile on his face for the entire day. He recalled many of the signs back in the day.
But the children hold a story of mercy.
That night he say with Carl. What's really weird is back home they never gave any discipline, but still they built an entire country on imagination. Otto replied they're built with what they followed. Everything was quiet. Hans gazed at someone who seemed to draw images that are made to change people and help people out. At the end there was story say all story can change for the end. He looked the sky where there was new light being made as Captain America would seem to shine. It's always a way and that was what he would want to show from back then. So if this story moved you, take a moment before you scroll. Somewhere in history's darkest hours, kindness and imagination still found a way to shine through, even in the unlikeliest of places, even in a prison camp. Stories like these remind us that humanity doesn't disappear in war, it just waits for someone to notice it again. If you'd like more forgotten pieces of World War II history, the small human stories hidden behind the headlines, make sure to like this video and subscribe. It helps keep these memories alive for the next generation. And before you go, tell us in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is there right now. Somewhere out there, across time zones and decades, someone else might be listening too, just like those men once did, discovering the power of a story.